Ladies and gentlemen, One Piece chapter 1129 is out, and I apparently could not have been more wrong with my last prediction. A lot of stuff got answered this chapter about things we were wondering, where we are, what's going on. So let's go through each and everything that was revealed this chapter. So the first few pages of this chapter really give us that sense of the Straw Hats are dolls in whatever world they're in, which we were right about in our last chapter review. I don't know why I'm saying are. I was right about in my last chapter review. We do get the blueprints to the room. It's very clear that this mysterious sun god is saying, you guys ruined my room. Oh, I mean temple, right? Like he's playing into this act. So a lot of people did theorize it, but it is evident that this is not like Elbaf, nor is it like an island. Like it is like a containment. And we figured that after the last chapter, but this chapter kind of just nails that point in when we see like the overhead, like this cool little overhead of what the lands they're in actually is. So yes, it is its own little room that we are stuck in. But I thought that maybe it was literally like a dollhouse and the Straw Hats had been shrunk. It turns out that is not the case. So let's get into why that is. But before that, I want to talk about this page on the sun god, where there's two things I want to draw attention to. The first is that he calls this place a giant detention center, not like a detention center for giants, just like a large detention center, I'd imagine he means here. My question is that why would they need such an elaborate detention center, seemingly for humans specifically on Elbaf, which I'm now pretty sure we're on Elbaf, which we'll get into later, but why would we need something like this? And two, completely unrelated to that, how is this mysterious sun god figure pulling a net out of his staff, right? So as far as the giant detention center goes, I think that's just something we can keep in the back of our minds. Like maybe there's some kind of conflict happening on Elbaf and there's humans involved that are not giants, so they need a detention center for them. But I'm actually more interested in this staff that he's wielding, right? It almost reminded me of Luffy's Gear 5 abilities, which, kind of makes sense because this guy's being called the Sun God, but it seems like he pulled this net out of thin air as if he was just manifesting it. Maybe it is just like a butterfly net that he's using and we just didn't see the details before, but it looks like he's like pulling this net out of thin air that's just appearing. So I think that's just something to keep in mind, especially because he's being called the Sun God and we know Luffy's Sun God abilities allow him to literally manifest anything. When he pulls the glasses out of his hair. So just something to keep in mind, a little tidbit that could be related. And then we get to this panel where this mysterious sun god is almost happy that the Straw Hats are breaking out of his detention center, as if he's waiting for some kind of narrative to unfold in this little world. It reminds me of all those people who make those giant rooms full of Lego cities and they do simulations in their basement and stuff like that. I always thought that stuff was kind of cool. This guy strikes me as that type of character. But what's more interesting about this panel is there's some kind of power that he's using here, right? There's black smoke or something coming up behind him, which I think makes sense. I would imagine this guy to be a power user, right? I don't think Oda would give this guy such an emphasis so early on in the arc for him to just be a one-off character who has nothing to do with the story. This guy has something in his back pocket that is a little strange. I don't know what this power is, but he is definitely a power user or has some kind of power that's being displayed in this panel. So then we get the first implication that I was wrong about the Straw Hats being shrunk and that we are actually on Elbaf and this guy actually is a giant. And that is when this sun god guy says, Hyruden may recognize you. If you don't remember who Hyruden is, he is the giant who joined the Straw Hat Grand Fleet after Dressrosa from Elbaf, right? So this sun god character is a giant, and what he's saying here is Hyruden recognize you guys. He knows what you're capable of because it's part of your Grand Fleet, but I don't. So let's see what you can do, right? So this guy knows who Hyruden is. He is a giant, which at first I was like, there's no way. He's 12 times bigger than Dorian Bragi. I think this might have just been an Oda size miscalculation. We know it's happened before where Oda will draw Luffy and Kaido at the same height and then have Luffy be the size of Kaido's big toe. It happens. So I guess this guy is just a normal giant, but we can put that aside for now. The important thing is this confirmed that we are in some capacity on Elbaf, and I was wrong about it not being Elbaf or potentially the Straw Hats being shrunk, right? There's more that alludes to this that we'll get to, but this was the breaker. Also, a little side note, I love this little segment about the sun god, like talking about the events happening in his little detention center as if he's reading like a chapter of a book. Just that kind of like, I guess you could call it a fourth wall break, where he's like, oh my god, what a brilliant chapter, as I'm reading like a brilliant One Piece chapter. It's like, I don't know, it just felt like a little bit of Oda shining through a character rather than like a character that Oda was writing. I thought that was really funny. And then, of course, the reveal that this sun god character knows the Straw Hats' names. This, again, led us to the fact that we are on Elbaf, or at least, in a place where someone knows the Straw Hats' notoriety, and the guy's a giant, so you'd imagine it's Elbaf. But this brings an even bigger question up that actually goes back to like 3 or 4 chapter reviews ago, where I claimed that I think there was going to be conflict on Elbaf, even though the Straw Hats are allies with the Giants. You wouldn't expect there to be conflict in an arc where the Straw Hats are like friends with like the main occupying force of the island, but I said there would be conflict, right? Because we're so close to the end of the story, I didn't think we'd have time for an arc that was kind of just dilly-dallying. I think this proves that, because why do we have a giant who is aware of the Straw Hats and their relationship to Dorian Broggy and Hyruden, who is acting as an opposing force to them? It doesn't make any sense to me that this guy is just doing this for fun against people who are his allies, right? There has to be some kind of giant alliance or some kind of faction on Elbaf that is against Dorian Broggy, against Hyruden, and against allying with humans, which I think is kind of setting the groundwork, the bones of a conflict that's going to come later in this arc. Maybe it's a small one that gets, finished quite easily when the rest of the Giants arrive with the rest of the Straw Hats, or maybe it's going to be like the bigger conflict in the arc. I don't know, but there's some kind of conflict between the Elbaf natives here. I also want to talk about this panel where Luffy says, I want to use a little Gear 4th, or it's time for a little Gear 4th. This is actually something I've been waiting for since the reveal of Gear 5 and what those power implications were. I always thought that if Luffy was able to do Gear 2, Gear 3, Gear 4 because of the nature of the Nika fruit, right, and they're all his imagination, doesn't that mean he can also mix gears, use one gear on one hand and one gear on the other, even if it's not Gear 5, right? Because, the power of the Nika fruit allows him to take advantage of his imagination, right? The only thing that the Gear 5 aspect does is kind of takes away some limitations. But if he already has mastered those other gears, can't he just add Gear 4 onto one hand? And I was, pleased to see that, he can do that. Something I thought maybe would be possible that Oda wouldn't, try and write into the story have Luffy doing, is in this chapter. I thought it was super cool that he made just one fist turn into Gear 4. I am really, really refreshed by this as well, because I was kind of sick of Luffy getting into fight Gear 5, right? There's no progression at all. So to see that imaginative kind of aura that Gear 5 brings mix into the other fighting styles that Luffy has established gives me a little bit of hope that we're not just going to be jumping to Gear 5 every time, and we'll get to see a more playful, imaginative Luffy with his older gears as well, which is, I'm excited for that. Speaking of that conflict I just mentioned before, we kind of get a big clue as to what it's about when we get the flashback of how the hell the Straw Hat Pirates got to Elbaf in the first place, which I will mention, the reason I thought that they were maybe shrunk or not on Elbaf was because I was so confused. How would they get separated from the giant pirates? Well, in this panel, that question is answered me in 2 different ways, right? Number 1, they got carried away by a bird, and number 2, the reason it happened without anyone noticing was because there's some kind of mist belt or like sleep mist belt that puts everyone to sleep before they get to Elbaf, right? So that's those 2 questions answered. For everyone who was wondering how the hell did they get to Elbaf and no one noticed with the crew that they were with, there's your answer. But what's more important with this panel is that, like I mentioned before again, it is alluding to some kind of conflict between the giant warrior pirates and then the new giant warrior pirates, right? Because this mysterious figure who dressed up the Straw Hats for this dollhouse is stating to this bird, right, how did you get away with kidnapping the Straw Hats if the giant warrior pirates were guarding them? Almost as if you were able to pull a fast one on the giant warrior pirates who are our enemy. That kind of vibe is what I get from this conversation, this flashback we're getting. Not only that, this guy is just straight up antagonistic to Hyruden, who is a member of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet and by proxy, a good guy. So to see him say oh, Hyruden was all about these Straw Hats, but they're not actually that strong, we kidnapped them like that. very clearly spells to me that there's a faction of giants, perhaps it's all of the new giant warrior pirates besides Hyruden, who think that the Straw Hats are Mickey Mouse and they shouldn't be kind of like lending themselves to help humans. Obviously, this guy's about to get his shit rocked because it's a Yonko crew, and he's about to realize Hyruden was correct to ally with the Straw Hats, but just the fact that he's saying right now, I can't believe Hyruden was wrong all along and the Straw Hats are this weak and the giant warrior pirates let us steal the Straw Hats from them, again lends itself to the fact that there's going to be some kind of conflict or faction of giants who aren't friendly to the Straw Hats and aren't like, we're going to have antagonists in the arc is what I'm saying. And then this last double spread, which is very nicely drawn, of Luffy using that Gear 4 fist that we talked about before to punch through the wall and like seemingly escape this prison into what I'm gonna guess is Elbaf, because judging by the look on Luffy's face, he's like, oh my god, look, I'm imagining next chapter we're gonna start with like a double spread of like the giant Elbaf landscape, and it's this like beautiful thing that is like looks exactly like the dollhouse we were just in, but is real and like way prettier or something like that. It kind of feels like it's building up to something like that. But something I want to talk about this chapter before we theorize about next chapter is that I have said for such a long time, and this is definitely a hot take, that I prefer a series with a smaller main cast, right? And I've said in the past in videos before that I think the Straw Hat crew would be better and the story would kind of be, I don't know, allow itself to have more time for main characters if there was only like 7 Straw Hats. Obviously, that's not how things are going to go, right? Oda loves all 10 Straw Hats, but just the fact that we're seeing an action sequence here with 5, I guess 6 if you count Chopper, 6 Straw Hats alone. Usopp got a moment. Nami got a moment. Zoro and Sanji got a moment. Luffy got a moment. All in this chapter. When all 10 Straw Hats are together, there is simply not enough time for something like that to happen, which is why I was very, I don't want to say happy, but I was very interested at the fact that we were separating the crew members here, because anytime this happens, it allows for everyone to get their individual character moments without stealing the spotlight from someone else. And this chapter is a perfect example of that. Literally everyone got a page where they did something sick this chapter, and I love that. I wanted that in Wano, but there was too many characters, so I'm happy, at least even if it's only for like a few chapters, we got the Straw Hats separated to have stuff like that. But as for next chapter, I'm gonna go ahead and guess we're gonna see the main Elbaf land, and that's probably what Luffy's looking at right now, like this giant landscape. Like I said, we're probably gonna get some more exposition about this antagonistic relationship between the new giant pirates and the giant warrior pirates. I could also see the main crew, I guess the main giant crew and the rest of the Straw Hats arriving in the next chapter as well, trying to bridge those gaps again together, and maybe some kind of explanation as to the Sun God's powers as he tries to like chase these Straw Hats out of this detention center, this dollhouse. So no break next week. We don't have to wait that long to figure out if I'm right or not. So until next time.